This month, of course, we have been discussing the remarkable figure and message, and possibly presented some reflections, at least, on the sources of the message of H.P. Blavatsky, and we include to wind that up and conclude that as well as we may this evening. In so doing, we have taken a look at various aspects, one of them being that while in civilian life, a Russian noblewoman, granddaughter of a Russian princess, and also let's say the associate of very prominent people in her native Russia. She subsequently became a world traveler, and somehow in the course of her travels she had fully developed her capacity as a messenger of another reality, the other reality embodying the esoteric tradition. With that, I think we sort of covered the major picture, with one exception, which I will return to now, which largely consists in the increasing view of those who have studied her life and her teachings, that to a very large extent the nature of her message has been misunderstood all this time. And that misunderstanding consisted of an excessive emphasis on the teaching aspect of her mission, and a largely intellectually toned, but in many ways really almost purely mythological account of the beginnings of the cosmos and the continuing history of humanity therein, in the monumental work, The Secret Doctrine, which, however, by now I think has revealed itself to be really largely of a nature that we did not suspect. And only within the last couple of decades there has emerged, and I will use quotations and there, like tonight, from the most concentrated of these, the esoteric instructions of H.P. Blavatsky. There has emerged let's say, a body of disclosures which previously was only intimated and intuited, and which really has to do with the character and the nature of her message that has not been, I feel, adequately emphasized in the past. Now, with these cryptic statements, I'll try to proceed to my talk itself, and maybe in the course of it, it's going to become less cryptic. Let's say it is very generally understood, even in academic circles, that she was a most outstanding influence on a certain kind of approach to reality, which my friend Professor Elwood, previously the chairman of the religion department for a long time at USC, has called the alternative mysticism, but which I persist in calling the alternative esoteric tradition. Here is one statement from a somewhat different source. Bruce Campbell, who is from the University of California, teaching at the University of California in Santa Barbara, in his several volumes work, Ancient Wisdom Revised, A History of the Theosophical Movement, actually a very fine work, wrote as follows, and I will only use this particular quotation. The story of the Theosophical movement begins with a remarkable 19th century émigrée, Madame Helena Blavatsky, and the buried religious tradition that she revived. Theosophy, as she called it, was an ancient Western tradition, the Gnostic tradition, which went underground when Christianity triumphed. This is a somewhat remarkable statement, coming especially from such a reputable academic source, because it places the numerous passages and indeed entire volumes that she authored and which she indicated were of Eastern, namely Tibetan, Hindu, and other type of Buddhist origin, into a somewhat different light. Although here also we must admit that while the tradition, as Professor Campbell correctly indicates, that she represented, definitely has a large and ongoing history in the West, and never needed to depend on sources from other cultures and other continents. It is nevertheless true that she, in addition to the remnants of the Western tradition, she also had access to sources in Asia, many of which were not known, and even now are, let's say, often in question, from Tibetan sources and from sources in India. I have also indicated, I think, at our first lecture, that there has been some verification from those sources as well, because the 14th Dalai Lama, His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso himself, had repeatedly stated that within the Buddhist system, H.P. Blavatsky counts as a bodhisattva, because her having brought her version of the Dharma, of the true liberating teaching to the world, and as such we can now beginning to see that her sources were manifold, and probably primarily of a non-external, of a non-physical nature, which would be understandable in terms of her teachings, in terms of what she advised people to do. Now, that being the case, we can proceed a little bit further, and we'll just take again a quick look at, let's say, her career of spiritual disclosures, wherein we need to state that she brought forth a large body of statements many of them appearing to be teachings, especially embodied in her work that up till now was really considered her magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine, which was published in 1888. Also smaller works, including her first great effort, Isis Unveiled. She lived at the end of her life first in South London, as I indicated earlier, at the home of her disciple Mabel Collins, who herself was an author of a couple of very lovely and very poetic works, Light on the Path and Ideal of the White Lotus, which you still could find copies about here and there, that she herself, namely Blavatsky, voiced her dissatisfaction very, very early after the publication of The Secret Doctrine. So that means probably about 1889 she made statements, oh well, you know, that's really an exoteric work. It's not at all the secret teachings as the title discloses, and if I can, I will give you more material that, well, let's say, has been more secret than The Secret Doctrine. So she was dissatisfied with her own chief work, The Secret Doctrine. In 1889, 1890, I'm just reviewing the historical data again a little bit, and the beginning of 1891, she made various efforts to rectify what she considered was the fault with The Secret Doctrine. This she did verbally at first in 1889 in discussions in the London Lodge of the Theosophical Society, which subsequently came to be called, rather correctly, the Blavatsky Lodge. The substance of these was published in 1890 and 91 in the Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, which are available. The only thing that I remember of those statements at this time is one with which she created an ongoing and probably endless historical controversy, which is really very amusing, and that is that she wrote she stated in these lectures and classes that she gave, and the statements were subsequently published in one of the books that I have here, wherein she said that Lucifer was not the devil, but the light bringer. She wrote this stated already in 1867, and then she recounted it. And this, of course, has, shall we say, scandalized the Christian communities on at least two continents, namely three, the American, the European, and the Asian in India. And we also need to remember that with all the serious intentionality that she had, she enjoyed herself also as being a bit of a trickster. And when she could see people get tremendously excited about something that she considered to be funny, then she was quite capable of laughing between taking a few bits of smoke out of her self-rolled cigarettes. But let us say with all of this, I mentioned, for instance, the last time, I don't know why I'm so fond of that image, that in the apartment that she and her helper, Colonel Olcott, occupied in New York City, in the foyer of the apartment there was a stuffed gorilla. And the gorilla wore evening dress, white tail and all that. And the gorilla had a little plaque underneath saying Charles Darwin. So, she certainly had a good and ever active sense of humor. Now, as she came, unbeknownst to her, probably at least unannounced by her, toward the end of her life, she made some serious efforts to try to put forth what she considered to be the far more, let's say, the version and the kind of understanding of her writings up to that point from a different point of view than the one that had been hitherto employed. And among these were the increasing statements that in her writings is a message that has not been understood, and humbly she all stated, probably has not been understood because she has not expressed it appropriately, and that this message is definitely concealed in the secret doctrine and in some of her other writings. While engaged in the task of putting forth these further explanations, she wrote one lovely little book, which initially I intended to use as a sort of quotations, but which I felt is really much better appreciated and understood when a person can read the entire treatise. It's just a small treatise. It is entitled The Voice of the Silence. And if one is to characterize it, it is definitely a work of mystical contemplation, which in turn advises practices of mystical contemplation, not intellectual teachings, not quasi-historical teachings, but insights that derive from the deeper inner levels and let's say, the need to see her work in that light. So I advise those of you who are so inclined and it's beautiful, poetic, transcendentally beautiful little book, The Voice of the Silence. I will give you a little sampling of the similar kind of writing that is an individual poem that's not in The Voice of the Silence. But it's the sort of thing that when you want to experience some deeper insight, when you want to deal with deeper thoughts than come to you ordinarily, it's really wonderful reading. So this was really the one writing that she still accomplished of the nature that she was now advocating and working toward right toward the end of her life. For The Voice of the Silence was written in the summer of 1889, while she went on a little esoteric how should we put it, esoteric vacation to Paris, where she was visiting her friend Lady Caithness, Duchess of Pomar, who was a very great advocate and patroness of the esoterica in Paris, but originally of English origin, and who had a wonderful big palace in Paris, and who loved H.P.B. dearly. So while there, away from the hubbub of all the Victorian intellectuals in London who were getting on her nerve, she was able to write the Voice of the Silence, and then soon after she got back to London, she became ill and died. And so on May the 18th in 1891, H.P.B. died. The instructions that she gave to small groups of students in 2 different installments have been written down and only published very recently, namely the last one I think in 2015. The instruction period wherein these materials were communicated by her to her students lasted only about a year, from August 1890 until May 1891, and they remained unpublished until 2015, and probably would still be unpublished if it hadn't been for the valiant scholar, the great historian of Blavatsky and of Theosophy, our good friend Mr. Michael Gomez of New York, Gomes, and whom we very much hope that as the travel facilities and all these things increase, we will have out here with us, probably within a year's time or so, to speak to us about these matters himself. Extremely learned and extremely astute and very wonderful and humorous gentleman. In any event, the instructions that she gave an ever smaller group of students have been written down, therefore, and are now available to us in 2 books, one of which I had with me and were sort of showing around, a big heavy one, I can hardly lift it, which is called The Secret Doctrine Commentaries, the unpublished 1889 instructions, but the one that I recommend and from which if I ever can stop my my associations and flow of thoughts, I will read a few passages from this. This is the more esoteric of the 2 esoteric works, and it's even entitled The Esoteric Instructions of H.P. Blavatsky. Now, let's continue from there, and let us say that it will be probably best first to look at this subject, well, in the manner in which she did esoterically. She was imbued with a mission, but that this mission was not to necessarily to establish a belief system, which to a very large extent her theosophy became. Now, this is certainly not something to hold against her, or even to hold against anybody else. I have known absolutely wonderful people who have been great help and instruction in my life, who treated the theosophical teachings as a belief system. This was the way in which they approached it, and they profited from it greatly. Even though some rebellious souls, including myself, have always felt that there was something not quite right about that approach. Until eventually, I would say that my intuitions were sustained and supported by some very prominent persons in the Theosophical Society, and I'm sure that wherever she has gone in the other world, she wouldn't hold it against me if I mentioned her name, like the late Miss Joy Mills, who was one of the great lights of the Theosophical Society, especially in America, who quite openly, in front of a goodly crowd in Crotona, in Ojai, has said, well, you must keep in mind that the secret doctrine is a myth. Now, I'm repeating things that I have said before, because in the common mind, a myth is a synonym for falsehood, for something that isn't true, or at least not factually true. But of course, largely due to the wonderful work of the 20th century great mythologists, among whom our own American Joseph Campbell certainly stands out very greatly, but with others, with Heinrich Zimmer and my countryman Carl Kerry and others, it has been, let's say, re-established, reaffirmed or affirmed in our age, and largely in the 20th century and in the early 21st, that a myth is not a falsehood, but that a myth is a tale with spiritually instructive and indeed transformative aspects and results. And as such, if the secret doctrine is really a myth, it is the kind of myth like some other great myths in history, or the Arthurian mythological cycle, the myths of the ancient Greeks and others, which when one contemplates them in depth, which is after all what the mystaes, the initiates of Eleusis and other mysteries were doing, if one does that, it causes powerful interior changes, powerful psycho-spiritual transformations in the person who in that fashion participates in the myth. And if indeed that was, let's say, the intentionality behind the writing of the secret doctrine, then that intentionality was a very important one and a very noble one. Only at the end of her life, H.P. Blavatsky was trying to put forth in a non-mythological, in a practical manner, in a manner which can be practiced, the same type of disclosures which, when implemented and properly practiced, would cause not only, let's say, a sort of titillation, a sort of excitement of the esoteric side of the human psyche, but which would be instrumental in bringing about really powerful, transformative experiences in such people. That's what she was trying to do. But death came and took her early. Now, let us say what kind of conclusions can we reach? When we look at the now available disclosures, the now available notes that have been taken in her two esoteric classes, and particularly the second one, which is in the work The Esoteric Instructions. In order to approach that, I think it would be a good idea to take a look at the work itself, and I already, I think, indicated in some earlier talks, because I was dreadfully afraid that the gremlins, who are extremely active in my household, I don't know why that is, but they're always there and they're always hiding things, and it takes quite a while before they get tired of it and return it. This is gremlinology. If I live another couple of years, maybe I'll write a book about it. Maybe it would be my first financially really successful book. The Science of Gremlinology. How do you? It really would be great. In any event, the gremlins hid my copy, which I had from the time that the book was published, and now I had to get another one. It wasn't easy. The entire the national headquarters of the Theosophical Society in Wheaton, both the publishing house and the bookstore had one copy, and I've got it, and I am going to put it in a gremlin safe spot, if I can find one. In any event, this of course was the second class in chronologically that she conducted, and which doesn't refer to the secret doctrine anymore. It tries to penetrate to the heart of the matter. And this heart of the matter, let's say, the main approach, the main thesis, is downright surprising, especially to those of us who have read theosophical literature, read many of her other works, her many articles and so forth, because on the face of it, at first sight, it seems contradictory to an awful lot of things that she wrote. And why is that? Because she makes no bones about it that her approach in these expositions of her work, in these explanations, has to do to a major extent with what in ancient times was called magic. Now, she did not speak terribly highly about magic or write about it in her career. Why? Because she had her own vocabulary. And when people said that, well, H.P.B, why are you using that particular word? My dear, you've got to remember that I'm Russian, so come on, don't make a big thing out of it. But in any event, what she attributed the word magic to in the 19th century was primarily spiritualism and the often frantic seeking after occult phenomena. So she did not employ the ancient definitions, shall we say. But when she conducted her class, which the content of which is present in this book, she used a different terminology, and she said that first of all, it is quite evident throughout this entire book that she wrote over and over again that there is a highly effective and what nowadays we would call a transformative esoteric tradition in the West. Now, she didn't see anything bad about Tibetan Buddhism, she didn't say anything bad about Hinduism or anything else, but she said, if you are really looking for what you need, I'm almost verbally quoting her now, if you really are looking for what you need, you don't have to go far away, you can find it here, you just really have to know how to look. Now, all right, what did she mean by that? And we can form some conclusions from looking at the structure and the content of this book, which is, after all, complete with notes made of her second class. And we can see right away that after an introductory, the chapters are called lessons. After the introductory, or not see, I'm misleading you. They are not called lessons, they are called instructions. This is the trouble with people who have a reasonably good vocabulary, that you have a tendency to substitute a synonym, and then they say, that's not what it says. I have encountered that several times in my life. But in any event, after the first instruction, the second instruction, number 2, is all about the kind of magic that she wanted to impart to us. Instruction number 2. At this point, I will only read the very first little paragraph, then I go on to what I consider to be the most important part. She begins instruction number 2, in view of the abstruse nature of the subject dealt with, the present instruction will begin with an explanation of some points which remained obscure in the preceding one, as well as some statements in which there was an appearance of contradiction. And the contradiction primarily has to do with this subject of magic that I mentioned. And then the first big division between in instruction 2 is entitled actually What Magic Is in Reality. And I'll read a couple of paragraphs here, and then I will move on from there. Esoteric science is, above all, the knowledge of our relations with and in divine magic. Just like that. Inseparableness from our divine selves. Self with a capital S, just the same way in which C.G. Jung spelled self. The latter, namely self, meaning something else besides our own, even our own higher mind. Thus, before proceeding to exemplify and explain these relations, it may perhaps be useful to give the student a correct idea of the full meaning of this most misunderstood word magic. Many are those willing and eager to study occultism, but very few have even an approximate idea of the science itself. Now, you know what? I don't very much like the word science, but I can't argue with the old lady because she isn't around. The reason for it being that since that time, primarily, since her time definitely, the term and the concept of science has been monopolized by a materialistic and secularistic stratum of society. This wasn't always that way. Rudolf Steiner, who after all was for quite a while the head of the Theosophical Society in Germany and subsequently built his own fabulous buildings and organizations in Dornach in Switzerland. Rudolf Steiner used the German term, the geistige Wissenschaft, which is not the same as Geisteswissenschaft, namely the spiritual science. But today that would be very difficult to use meaningfully because of what happened to science. Now what happens to people who are too fond of science, that's another catastrophe, but I'm not going to mention that one. But let us say at that time this was still a useful term. So many are those willing and eager to study occultism, but very few have have an approximate idea of the science. And after all, science, scientia in Latin just means knowledge itself. Now, very few of our American and European students can derive benefit from Sanskrit works, or even their translations, as these translations are, for the most part, merely blinds to the uninitiated. And this is also that perhaps a lot of theosophical students need to remember. Don't load up your books and your lectures with Sanskrit, but try to find translations, or good translations for it. Now she says, I therefore propose to offer to their attention demonstrations of the aforesaid drawn from ancient and mostly Neoplatonic works, where actually that is a euphemism she uses for Gnostic, because very, very little was known, Gnostic material was known in her days. These are accessible in translation, and in order to throw light on that which has hitherto been full of darkness, it will suffice to point to a certain key in them. Thus the gnosis, both pre-Christian and post-Christian, will serve our purpose admirably. So now she switches over to that. Theosophy is a Neoplatonic term. It was coined by the founder of the Neoplatonic school, Ammonius Saccas, in Alexandria. But gnosis, so here she comes to it. There are millions of Christians who know the name of, now he comes to the teacher with whose teachings and commenting upon whose teachings occupies a major portion of this book. There are millions of Christians who know the name of Simon Magus, and the little that is told about him in the Acts being the Acts of the Apostles, which of course are contain deleterious information about this mysterious man, because he was the concurrence in German. He was a rival of the early Christians. And that is put in the Acts of the Apostles, that he holds various arguments with St. Peter. In any event, but very few who have even heard of the many motley, fantastic and contradictory details which tradition records about his life. The story of his claims and his death is to be found only in the prejudiced, half-fantastic records about him in the words of the church fathers such as Irenaeus, Epiphanius, and Justin, and especially in the anonymous Philosophumena, so the early work. See, there was no Nag Hammadi library in those days. Yet he is an historical character, and the appellation of Magus was given to him and was accepted by all his contemporaries, including the heads of the Christian church, and so forth. And then she goes on, Simon, as all other Gnostics, taught that our world was created by the lower angels. Well, I would say some of it was created by some very low angels, whom he called aeons, which is incidentally the term that C.G. Jung picked up, both for the zodiacal ages and for various beings. So he mentions only 3 degrees of such, namely aeons. It was, and is useless, as explained in the Secret Doctrine, to teach anything about the higher angels, and he therefore begins at planes further down. In any event, he speaks that she recounts that the universal element of let's say, informative and transformative energy that Simon used in the works quoted by him is fire. And here she has a little bit that says, the secret side of fire is concealed in its evident and objective sides. He writes, she's quoting Simon, which amounts to saying that the visible is ever present in the invisible, and the invisible in the visible. This was but a new form of stating Plato's ideas of the intelligible, the noeton, and the sensible, the aisteton, and Aristotle's teachings on the power of potentiality, the dynamis, and the actual. For Simon, all that can be thought of, all that can be acted upon, was perfect intelligence. Now, I think we can stop that at that particular point, and I can go on with some other inducements here, which may be useful. Now, first of all, Simon is always referred to by both his friends and his enemies as the magus, the magician. And so, let's see, what are we talking about here? In a true ancient sense, the magi or magicians appear in many different references in ancient literature, and we might say that throughout actually the entire history of the Western or Mediterranean culture, the figure of the magus and the subject of magic is often present. Morton Smith, president of Colombia years ago, wrote 2 books that shocked particularly the theological world back in the 1970s. One called Jesus the Magician, based on the discovery of the secret Gospel of Mark, which has to do with the magic of the raising of Lazarus, very likely, and within the history of the Christian Church, we find various outstanding figures, such as Albertus Magnus in the 11th century, and Pope Sylvester II, Gerbert of Aurillac by birth, who, especially the latter being of great regard in my home country, because it was Pope Sylvester II, the magician pope, who sent what became the Holy Crown of Hungary, the royal crown, to the first king of Hungary, Saint Stephan, and established the Christian kingdom in Hungary. So the the statements that have been made, that the Hungarian country of Hungary was founded in magic are really not misplaced. Now, much of this goes back to the 1st century, where a Samaritan teacher, Samaritans having been a relative sort of first cousins of the Jews, a Samaritan teacher, namely Simon, became very well known and became a big representative of the, let us say, of the esoteric tradition. Most likely a contemporary of Jesus. As early as 150 AD, he was regarded as the founder of the Gnostic so-called heresy. He became famous both throughout the Middle East and Rome, and as I will soon indicate to you, in many other parts of the world as well. He was apparently the first one to recount the Sophia myth, wherein he indicated that there was the divine feminine wisdom that descended to earth and was captured here, and that among other things, among other people, incarnated in the historical person of Helen of Troy. You know, the lady whose face launched 1,000 ships and more. And that this spiritual being that descended from the height was involved in even in the making of the world through the angels whom she brought with her. So there, in her self-aggrandizement, they did not want to admit that some of the lower angels did not want to admit that she was their progenitor or mother, and they claimed that they were the ones who created the world. That's just a little incident. His chief disciple was another Gnostic teacher named Menander, who was also from the Samaritan people. Now, a later mythic development was the metamorphosis of Simon's figure into the Renaissance-era European magician Faust. Faustus means the fortunate one in Latin. Which was one of the appellations given to Simon Magus. If you really want to research literature and the remote origins of various literary figures, you may even find, as I think that I did, that at least significant elements of Miguel Cervantes' great tale of Don Quixote are modeled on Simon Magus. Already in her first work, in Isis Unveiled, published 1874, she has a wonderful tale about Simon. H.P. Blavatsky has a wonderful tale about Simon Magus with the source undisclosed. So Blavatsky, this is also, these are the strange, the really sort of mysterious things about Blavatsky, that she seems to have had access to sources which she could quote verbatim and which you can't find anywhere else, or find sometimes eventually in the course of history with a great deal of difficulty. Right in her lifetime, that was to some extent true. She had two young men who were relatives of each other. I don't know for sure now whether they were brothers or that they were cousins. They were the Massey, M-A-S-S-E-Y, the Massey couple, the two guys, and they were her research legs. In the morning, she would call in Gerald Massey and C.C. Massey and say to them, "All right, boys, now go to the British Museum. I tell you which room. If you go to a particular room, you will probably find this there. I have maybe a page or two of quotations in my hand that came to me during the night, but that we have to verify in the actual book. So you go there and find it and see whether this matches and make some notes." Yes, ma'am. So off they went, and inevitably they found the sources which in printed form were not available to H.P. Blavatsky. She didn't go to the British Museum, but she knew where they were and she knew how they could be found. So let's see, she had unusual ways of information. And here's this particular quotation, which to my knowledge so far has not been found in any existing scripture. Yet it sounds very, very true and very correct in terms of the legendary associated with Simon Magus. Here is the quotation. "Simon, laying his face upon the ground, whispered in the earth's ear, 'O Mother Earth, give me, I pray thee, some of thy breath, and I will give thee mine. Let me loose, O Mother, that I may carry thy words to the stars, and I will return faithfully to thee after a while.' And the earth, strengthening her status, none to her detriment, sent her genius to breathe her breath upon Simon, while he breathed on her, and the stars rejoiced to be visited by the Mighty One." H.P.B. reproduced this in her book, Isis Unveiled, in the first volume. Now, it might be useful to even introduce a little bit of possible material here that would be very difficult to find, and that I really just came upon, let us say, accidentally and incidentally. There have been discovered some, of course there are quite a few, but discovered some ancient Celtic books, which presumably predate the coming of St. Patrick, who was really a Roman, and who counts as the apostle of the British Isles, and which point in a strange direction. These are old Celtic books. Some of them were found in Lindisfarne and some other old Celtic sites. And this is what is in the books. It says that some of our people, proto-Irish and proto-Scots, probably, Celtic people, went to Rome, and they met someone in Rome whose name was Simon, and who was a mighty sorcerer and a mighty wizard. And they became friendly with Simon, so that even when these Celtic folk went back to the British Isles, they stayed in touch with him. Well, they probably had some cell phones. Or, what's the even more effective phone? You know, in any way, they had some methods of communication. And that the result of this communication was that Simon had a number of sons, and that he sent his sons to the Celtic lands, to the British Isles. And there they married the daughters of the local population, so that a whole sort of a whole big extended family came about from the lineage of Simon the magician and of the local Celtic esotericists, so to say. And how did this happen? Well, in these books, which are, they are mythic in nature, the statement is made that Simon and his family knew how to fly through the air. Now, they don't mention which airline they used, a prehistoric airline, but that they flew. That they flew to the British Isle to court the Celtic ladies. Well, they must have had considerable attractions, probably with their beautiful red hair and, things of that sort. So all the way from the Mediterranean, the Simon's offspring, the youthful magicians, flew to the British Isles and started families there. And that in turn brought about magical families, a magical race, and that the proclivity toward what we might call the preternatural, the proclivity toward magic, toward the visionary reality and magical activity that came to become so strong in the British Isles, came from the family of Simon Magus. Now, what does this mean? Well, I wouldn't doubt it. The good magician could fly, but whether he could fly that far, I'm not sure. But there are other ancillary possible explanations, and these may be more important than we think. And for instance, for quite a long time, when observing in various art books and so forth, Celtic decorative art, with all the knots and so forth, I was sort of stirred up with some kind of, why is that? I said, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Coptic decorative art, primarily Ethiopian Coptic decorative art. So why is that great similarity? Not only in Scotland and Ireland and England, but clear up to the Scandinavias. There are ancient churches that were built which contain exactly that kind of decorative motifs. So that gave me an idea that there must have been interaction between Coptic Egypt, which extended into Ethiopia, and distant places, particularly in the British Isles. So what we have here is a mythic explanation of the connection between the magical, the magical practice of the Mediterranean area, the Gnostic magic attributed to and founded by Simon Magus on the one hand, and its kith and kin in other countries. So I think that is a significant recognition, which again does not have to be taken in a physical, literal sense, of course, but which indicates that the ancient magical tradition had traveled and had reached distant places, particularly those inhabited at that time by the Celtic peoples, and therefore was not confined any longer to any one geographical area. Now, with this and other incidents and stories that may be told, we come now to the possible explanation of what kind of a magic H.P. Blavatsky is talking about, and what kind of magic the mysterious Simon Magus and his spiritual or physical offspring may have transported elsewhere. Now, I made this little diagram, and as I said, I'm a very bad draftsman, but what we have here is the structure of the human personality and its enhancement and with an eventual union with a transcendental deific selfhood. Initially, this can be represented as a square and a triangle. These are also known in alchemy and elsewhere. Now, the four corners of the square are, I have used the terms which Blavatsky used for her explanation of human nature, of the four lower so-called bodies of the human, namely the physical body, the astral body, as she called it, which is primarily has to do with feeling. You know, it's called Kama Rupa in Sanskrit, the etheric body and the mental body. If you translate those yet further in our terms, into psychological, primarily Jungian psychological functions of consciousness, you will find that these are sensation, feeling, thinking, and intuition, or at least those are the equivalents. So that's the human the way he is. These are according to the Blavatsky system, and that's in all her other books too, of the four lower bodies, the rupas as they are called in Sanskrit. By body is meant here that they are vehicles of consciousness. Not even C.G. Jung could define them better than that. The four functions are the vehicles of consciousness. Now, however, there is a tendency, there is a drive, there is a longing within the human personality for what? For more. For more of what? More of consciousness. An expansion of consciousness, or reaching into a kind of consciousness that as yet is not available to us. And this is symbolized in my little diagram here by a triangle that is sort of floating above the square. And this, in Blavatsky's terminology, where she used Sanskrit, are the higher manas, which means the higher mind, the higher thinking faculty, buddhi, which is spiritual intuition, and finally the ultimate seed of divinity, the spirit Atman itself. So what we have then in the when we look at these points, 4 down below and 3 above, we get 7. These are the ones that Blavatsky called, and the Theosophists sometimes call, the 7 vehicles or the 7 bodies of consciousness. Now, initially, the higher triangle, namely what could be called the transcendental mind, which comes out of the thinking function, the higher manas, is the first one probably that the individual might contact. Then there is a sort of spiritual intuition, which is very much like the nous of the ancient Greeks. And all of these, when they come together and come to the ultimate point, reach the spirit. The pneuma, as it is called in Greek, the spiritus, as it is called in Latin, and the Atman, as it is called in Sanskrit. So there is a construct of higher consciousness that is connected with the human personality, but is for the most part, until some processes take place, is inactive. But the magician, even the primitive magician, let's say the shaman, the primitive seer, the one who maybe by birth, maybe descending from Simon Magus and the Celtic ladies, who knows, so has inner vision, is able to envision aspects of being and of consciousness which we are not really operative within our sphere as yet. And so it can establish a contact of paranormal vision with this higher self. So there is a lower self, there is a higher self. But the lower self can, upon occasion, get a glimpse of the higher self, and thereby its desire, its aspiration for this higher consciousness increases. And this I'm now using the buzzwords of ceremonial magic, which of course have been inherited from ancient times. This is known as a magical vision. Or from the Middle Ages on, when people had to be concerned about not being burnt at the stake as heretics, then it was called the vision of the holy guardian angel. To this day in magical circles referred to as the HJE, the holy guardian angel. Now, which means that there can be a tenuous contact at any time in the regular, ordinary, untransformed human being of something higher. And Jung, of course, referred to the contact with that, for instance, as the transcendent function. So there is function of feeling, function of thinking, function of sensation, and there is the transcendent function, that which reaches beyond. With that transcendent function, we can receive intimations of this higher being that is us, but we are not in regular contact with it yet. Now the magic starts. The magician says, how can I become more of that other being? How can I reach out and establish closer and closer contact with what sometimes is called the higher self, or the higher three bodies of the Theosophists, such as the higher manas, the Buddhic, and the Atman. Now, this is the purpose of magic. This is the real purpose of magic. This is the kind of magic that we can deduce from the few writings that we have inherited even from Simon Magus, and then from the practitioners of the ars magica, the magical art throughout history. By the way, the very word magic, magia, comes, which is Latin, comes from the Greek mega, which means big, large. And so what does this mean? That there is a possibility of enlarging our consciousness. We don't have to remain with the limited consciousness confined to our intellect, confined to our senses, confined to our excitement and our emotions, and maybe even some of our intuitions. No, we don't have to be satisfied with that. There is a possibility, if we know how to go about it, to establish a closer contact. And this is the purpose of real magic, clear down till the 19th century, when a magical scholar whom H.P.B. had a great deal of respect for, and so did many other people, the French magical scholar Eliphas Lévy called la magie haute, the high magic. And this is where a great deal of trickiness resides. And what is that? Because when consciousness begins to enlarge, when the closeness begins to arise, an interaction comes about between the lesser self that we know and this higher self, then that causes all kinds of strange things to happen. This is the locale, the fons and origo, as you would call it in Latin, the fountain and the origin of what? Of miracles. This is a miracle. Because things begin to happen that ordinarily don't happen. And why do we have so much preoccupation with healing, teleportation, astral journeys, flying saucers, heaven knows all what else in occult circles? Why is that there? Because at a certain point, the human psyche, as it is called now psychologically, the psyche begins to sense, aha, I can enlarge. I can have, with my consciousness, I can have access to other realities and other phenomena. In other words, I'm a potential miracle worker. You know? I am the kind of magician who pulls rabbits out of his hat, although that, of course, is an imitation. And that is why that particular stage is called the conversation. At first, there can be a vision of the higher self, of course. That's what the shamans practice. That's what various psychedelic substances stimulate, all kinds of things. The Greeks drank a good deal of wine. And at times when they really wanted to get there and see something weird, they put something in the wine. But let's say those are the initial contact with this higher self, wherein still the identities are very different, and wherein also the conclusions that one may draw from these contacts are feeble and fallible. And these are therefore the lower forms of magic. And they are still there, and however are becoming now more direct. The illusions, the falsity, the excess, the deception, which is always there. Because we need, one thing we may need to remember, and you just got to take my word for it this time, but plenty of other people have said it and written it too, namely that the worlds, the realms of reality, which are ordinarily not available to us and not to our physical eyes, are full of strange and deceptive things. So one has to be careful, because you can very easily be pulled into subsidiary realities, sort of sub-realities, which when all is said and done, maybe gone too, said and done, does not avail us very much. It does not bring us contact with of any kind with the ultimate spirit. But this is where the spirits of the dead are. That is why H.P. Blavatsky had to distance herself from the spiritualists, who were very unhappy over that. Because they said, what good is it talking to the dead? I mean, after all, ladies and gentlemen, they are dead, right? And moreover, once you step beyond the boundaries of the square with our physical senses, with our thinking, with our feeling and our intuition, once we step beyond that, we don't really know. We are out of our usual depth, and therefore what we see, what we hear, what may be talking to us, mind you, I didn't say who, I said what may be talking to us, and so is in terms of its meaning is up for grabs. So you are in a very tenuous area there. Now I must admit that tenuous as it is doggone interesting. And that is why some people have been attracted to it all the time. Doggone interesting, it most definitely is. It's more fun than a barrel full of monkeys. You know, whatever metaphor you may use. But the problem is that it's also tricky. For instance, one symbol of it, because it's part of it, but it's a good symbolization of the whole invisible realm, are the legendary about fairy creatures, gnomes, whatever you wish to call them, leprechauns and so forth, which exist. Listen, there was a theosophist, only a theosophist would do something like that, by the name of W.Y. Evans Wentz. I had the pleasure of meeting him in his old age, not mine, and he was an extremely learned and very wonderful gentleman. Now, he wrote, now get this, in the early 1900s, he wrote a doctor's dissertation in Oxford, which was accepted as a dissertation and bestowed a doctorate upon him, on fairy faith in Celtic countries. And I thought, oh well, you know, a lot of people do that. But then when I read it, I see that Dr. Evans Wentz's thesis, the real thesis truly was that there were such things and that there were people who saw them and interacted with them, that it was not an illusion, but that creatures like that there was enough evidence indicating that these, these fairy creatures and whatever other names we may call them, really existed, and that people who were sensitized to their presence would have contact with them. And Oxford University accepted this as a doctor's dissertation. Well, I think there were some smarter people in Oxford at that time than there are now. Or in all the universities for that matter. But in any event, but what can happen then is that because these things, these invisible beings are real, they can fascinate us and attract our attention, and in some cases sort of play with us. Why? Because it's fun to them. At least that is really the insight of a lot of people. Madame Blavatsky obviously was in touch with these kingdoms. There are descriptions of people who didn't really know her very well, who were in the room helping her with something, and she was lying down because she was in bad health for quite a few years or so forth. And then she was looking for a pen or something, because she was always scribbling. She reached out, and they saw a little bitty dark hand coming and handing her a pen in the air. And these were not professional occultists. They said, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" They were, if anything, they were somewhat horrified. Now, why is that? Because she was in touch with all of these magical kingdoms, but apparently she was in touch with them in a commanding position, which is the true position of a real magician. He tells the beings, the energies that are there, to do what he or she wants them to do. And she always fluffed those things off over, and so these things happen. But when you get descriptions of her life by reliable people, you come across a good deal of that. She was visiting her family in Russia. She came to some cousin who had children, and that was that way even when I was little. People didn't go to a family who had a child without bringing a present. If you didn't bring a present to the child, you were no good. And you probably won't be invited a second time, right? So there she came, and she was meeting the children, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't bring anything. I didn't bring any present." So she said, "Wait, just let me be a little while." So rubbed her hand, and there was a toy. Magician. Again, this is not a big deal as far as the occult world is concerned, but she was capable of doing things like that, and that worked into her later life. And of course, here were all these psychic researchers and spiritualists and so forth. That's what they wanted from Blavatsky. Come on, produce miracles for us. And she as much as said to them, sometimes said it outright, "Gentlemen, you want a miracle? There are possibilities of miracles. The miracle that you really seek is the miracle of contacting your true self. To be in with that which is more real than what you see here, and not just producing other physical or related phenomena. These are child's play, but we are made in order to facilitate and ultimately produce the greatest miracle of all, which is the total expansion of our consciousness, which is the union of the lesser and the greater, which I tried to symbolize in the last one of these, where I called union, wherein the higher self, or the holy guardian angel, whatever you want to call it, comes to rest upon the square. The triangle rests upon the square, and the two have become one. That is the ultimate act of magic, and that is the real Theosophy. Because the ability to do that, and the ability to appreciate it and utilize it subsequently in life, that is the great magic. That is the greatest magic of all. But of course, the road to every goal, even in the physical world, the road is long, and along the road one meets all kinds of sights. Some of them exciting, some of them not. You might even meet an alligator. You might, around here you might meet a rattlesnake. You better watch out. That is the magical journey from here to there. That is part of the magical journey, in the course of which the transcendental, the transcendent, if we want to call it that way, meets the immanent. And where, if you have done the work right, you have become a whole, a total, a complete human being. Up to that time we are not. We are not whole and we are not complete. There is something missing. Why is there so much longing, so much desire, so much unhappiness, so much fear, which we certainly have experienced and have been indoctrinated in recently and so forth? Why is so much of that in the world? Because we are incomplete. There is something missing. And until somehow that something comes to us and we come to it, we will never feel happy in the long run, because we are not whole. Only wholeness, only totality produces true meaning, of which I spoke, I think, a couple of days ago somewhere else, and true happiness. And this is the high magic. This is the true magic. This is the magic of Simon, the magician, and others. But that square within which we live, and the square is full of lowly ideas and desires. Oh, how nice it would be for me, anything, to have a bigger bank account, to own my own airplane. I wouldn't know what the heck to do with it, of course. All these sorts of things. How nice that would be. But that is not what we really seek. And many other things. Personal relationships, love affairs, marriages, things like that. They can bring great and joyous benefits, and one hopes that all of us who partake of that will have such benefit. But even as Jung pointed out, even there, no matter closer relationship, or maybe that wasn't Jung, I think that was Sir Christmas Humphreys, the Buddhist, from the Buddhist Society in London. You know. But anyway, he said, no matter how close a relationship, the skin is never broken. They are still two separate beings. Why? Because we seek union, a real union with something great. And nothing earthly, nothing human, animal, pets, everything else, nothing here can truly compensate for the lack of that. But it is something that has to happen inside. And at least I know about one gentleman who rediscovered that and put it in a form of expression which was acceptable to many in the intellectual world, and that gentleman was C.G. Jung. And he called this magic individuation. And he tried to find a psychological method wherein an analyst, a Jungian analyst, could help in an individual who comes there to achieve such a union, such an individuation, because it says individuation comes from the German individuum, which in turn comes from the Latin, and it helps to know a few words in other languages. You know, I'll never regret the fact that I had 8 years of Latin and things like that. 8 years. It was fun. You know, especially in the higher grades, we really had fun. But let's say all of these, the issues being that what we are seeking and what we are needing is to become an indivisible unity, a union with the chief hallmark of which is exactly the union of the square and the triangle, and the union of the lesser self and the higher self. And knowing or unknowing, nolens volens, as we call it in Latin, this is what we really seek. Everything else is a substitute. Everything else is close to being a will-o'-the-wisp, leading us somewhere where probably there is nothing. But we need to keep in mind that there is a self. Blavatsky spelled it with a capital S. C.G. Jung spelled it with a capital S. There is a self. And that self is as desirous of meeting us and becoming one with this ego, with this personal self, as the personal self is eager for meeting it. And the work, the task, the job of the magicians, of the Simon Maguses, of the Blavatskys, of the shamans of old, or of the wizards of later times, and of some of the great saints who sometimes were the same. You know, both Albertus Magnus and his pupil Thomas Aquinas were saints and magicians at the same time. Acknowledged as such in their time. But let us say this is what we really seek. And therefore the coming of that magic is the fulfillment of life. It is the fulfillment of human destiny. When that occurs, then we have for the first time, maybe in millions of years, if reincarnation is really that much of a possibility, for the first time we have become a real human, a united human, a unified being, for the first time, the self and the ego, the upper and the lower, have come together and have joined in a union now that shall never cease. This is the promise of the spiritual life. It is this spiritual life that H.P. Blavatsky tried to facilitate among humanity. A lot of it was misunderstood, but behind the misunderstandings, underneath the clouds and the fog and the mists of misapprehension and of misunderstanding, there is the great intentionality. You have to become magicians, you have to accomplish the great magic, and you have to avail yourself of the help that the messengers of the tradition, that the saints, the sages, the wise men, the true magicians, the practitioners of the high magic were trying to impart to you. And if you received it, then here it is, work with it and become what you were destined to become. Perhaps millions and millions of years ago, maybe from the far end of the galaxies, where great magicians like Giordano Bruno have traveled in their consciousness. All of that is possible, but don't short-circuit it by lowly things, by personal desires, by personal fears, by self-seeking and by selfishness, because these are the things that hold you down. The reason that you haven't accomplished that union yet is because you have been too much pulled into the other, into the world of the square. Yet all of this is possible. It has been possible. It has been done. It's being done at this very moment in some places. And God willing, and with the help of the messengers like Blavatsky and others, it shall happen with us and to us. And it will be more important than all the technology. It will be more important than all the so-called science. It will be more important than all the finance and all the excitement and all the distractions that are offered around here. Because this is the great treasure. This is the treasure that we were seeking. This is the gold under the Rhine. This is the chalice of the Grail. This is the stone of the philosophers. This is the treasure of the ages. And we are called to come in contact with that, to be united with that treasure, and thereby to have accomplished the purpose, the meaning of life. One of the people who helped us in that regard and continues to help us with her work was H.P. Blavatsky. And I at least am profoundly grateful, and I have been grateful since my early years, since my 20s when I first encountered her work, that she has communicated this to me and to others, and thereby advanced our consciousness, advanced the good things in our lives, and with them we can go on. And maybe, because she certainly wanted that to be done, try to help others to recognize that such a good thing exists, and that they may achieve it, and that they may be whole, they may be total, they may be real, they may be magical, and they may be good. These things are a possibility. And there are those who made us aware of that, and for them, and among them, the Russian woman with her cigarettes and with her little curly reddish hair, and her incredible access to the greater worlds. This one was one of the great helpers. And for that help, and for all the help received through others throughout the thousands of years, we are grateful, and we shall remain grateful, and we shall continue to cooperate with the ineffable greatness which is on its way to us. Right now it's on its way to us. Forget about all the fears, forget about all the warnings, forget about your so-called the science, as if there were only one science. Forget about all the blasted politicians. Remember that something, an ineffable greatness, a wonder, a glory, a wholeness, an ultimate happiness is on its way to us, and we in turn are on our way to it. What could be greater? What could be happier? What could be something to be more grateful about? If there is such a thing, I don't know it, but I'm also grateful for those who helped us in that regard, including once again and now in conclusion, thank you, Helena Petrovna. We appreciate what you brought, and we continue to revere your work and your memory, and so mote it be. All kinds of little things that can be said but don't need to be said. But if it's, why did she choose with her friends the Theosophy of the Neoplatonists? If she chose a kind of medicine that will stop all epidemics, if she chose a technology that will do everything, would that have been a Theosophia? No. She chose the wisdom of the gods, which can turn humans into gods.
Oh, yeah.